This 10-minute drawing exercise is going to give us practice at a couple of things. One of them is stacking shapes vertically on top of one another. Another one is keeping our angles correct, because the angle we're looking at this tower from, it is in 3-point perspective. And so we have those three lots of angles to be consistently changing as we move up the tower. We also need to work at proportion as well, because we want to keep the various elements of this spire in proportion to each other. And thirdly, although at a glance this spire looks relatively plain, there is actually quite a bit of detail in it, but the type of detail it is, little cupids, little angels' faces and wings and other decorative elements, is both small and it's too complex for a quick 10-minute drawing. So we're going to have to try and capture the effect of this detail, give the sense that it's there, make someone looking at our drawing feel like they're seeing it, but at the same time not actually drawing it. So a few great things to practice in this, all with the 10-minute time frame, because that will also keep us pushing forwards on this. And what I found was, because of the things I needed to do in this 10 minutes, I found that I drew probably slightly more loosely, more gesturally for this sort of subject than I normally would. And I've got to say, except for one little mistake I made, I was very happy with the result. So you can see I'm starting on the base. These are pretty geometric shapes. I'm still going for box rectangular shapes that are there at the start, lower down to start from, because I figure I can see the proportions of those more easily. I'm using a 0.1 millimeter Unipin fine liner black ink pen, if you're wondering. It's not so much getting the angles absolutely the same as in my reference, but it's getting them consistent in my drawing, so that as the angles get higher, they tilt more and more in whatever direction they're tilted. Now, we can't see eye level in this. There is no horizontal line, which tells us that either the photo's been severely cropped and we're just looking at the top of the photo, or the camera, far more likely in this case, was tilted upwards. Please hit that like button if you're finding this interesting, and if you're finding this series interesting as well. And if you can see that hype button, please hit that for me as well. So I'm just getting a little bit of the base here. I actually wasn't going to go down further in terms of my intentions when I drew this, but at the end I found I had 60 seconds left over that I wasn't expecting. So I did go just a bit further down, and I think it makes a more complete sense of the spire. So probably this next point was in some ways the trickiest, because the corners are angled, they're beveled in effect, and I have to allow for that. And this is where I made one little mistake, and that was with the right hand bevel and that little rounded scroll work that comes out at the base, like a bit of a decorative buttress effect. And there should be another line to the right of that one before I do this little scroll thing, because there is a pilaster, there is a shallow squared off column that sits in the center of that bevel. It doesn't actually wholly create the bevel, and that little pilaster is in the center. That little rounded scrolling buttress is in the center of the pilaster. And so generally it should have been moved over probably about 2 millimeters on my drawing. Now notice that I realized that I'd pushed this shadowed area too high, and so I just brought it back down 2 millimeters, and I'll hide that difference in the little angel head and wings and other decorative parts that are there. So this is where we often get an opportunity, if something's not quite right, to make corrections and to hide, in effect, those original marks that we're not quite so happy with. And in most cases, I find that's a better outcome. So, keeping it fast and furious. If I tried to draw this more precisely, there's no way I could have drawn it within 10 minutes. So it's a good lesson in the fact that whatever subject we have within reason, there are ways we can draw it in shorter periods of time, but we have to make adjustments to how we see it and how we try and capture what we see. So not just drawing the effect of detail, but even simplifying the effect of that detail. Sometimes it's easier to develop this skill if we draw larger complex things smaller rather than larger. If we have more space on the paper, it can be very tempting to try and draw more of the detail more precisely. But when there's simply not room for the ink there, then that's something we often don't do in the same way. So now I'm reaching the top, and it threw me for just a moment, this last section under the cap, as I think of the rounder bit on top, because it doesn't line up quite as, in my mind, straightforward away with what's underneath. Which means I have to look at it more carefully. Again, initially I pushed these sides up too high, and so I drew over the top of them and hid my original marks under some cornices that come up over the top of those corners. So again, if we see that things aren't quite in proportion, and it's easier to see them obviously after we've put them on the paper, and we can see, no, this is too tall now that I've put it there, so make it shorter if at all possible. And now the cap. Again, observation. Please hit that like button if you haven't already. And notice how I divide this rounded cap into segments, and I draw the segments lining them up with what comes underneath them. I find these bits that sit on the very top, whatever they are, crosses, just poles, decorative elements, I find them a bit of a challenge, a bit nerve-wracking, because if we don't get them right lined up on the vertical of the tower, at whatever angle the tower is, well, it's usually pretty obvious. And now I realize that I do have a little more time, and I go back down and just do this lower section. Hope you have a go. Of course, you'll find the link in the description below that will take you to the reference photo so you can have a go drawing this yourself. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. A great little creativity starter for the morning, and some really good skills to be learning, consolidating, and simply enjoying. So I hope you give this a go. But in the end, whatever you draw, however you draw it, and however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.